Rain slid down the windows like a slow-moving tide, blurring the cracked sidewalk and the gray sky beyond. Mark Davis sat hunched over a worn library desk, his textbooks spread open but unread, his eyes staring at numbers on a spreadsheet that felt more like a death sentence than a budget. The figures didn't lie. His part-time job couldn't cover rent, his law school tuition was overdue, and his mother's medical bills kept arriving like clockwork. His fingers dug into his temple as he leaned back in the creaky wooden chair, exhaustion pressing down like a weight he couldn't shake. His phone buzzed on the desk. Unknown number. He almost ignored it. Another scam. Probably, but something made him answer. Mark Davis speaking. The voice on the other end was smooth, elegant, and precise. The kind of voice you imagine belonged to someone sipping wine in a silk robe, while looking out over a private vineyard. "Mr. Davis, this is Eleanor Brooks. I believe we need to speak." Mark frowned. "I'm sorry, who?" "I know about your debts," she said, her tone steady. "Your father's loans, your mother's hospital expenses, the tuition you're weeks behind on." He stood slowly. "How do you?" "I know enough," she interrupted, her voice like ice over glass. "Meet me at Brooks Bistro. 7 p.m. tonight. I'll explain everything." Before he could say another word, the call ended. Mark stared at his phone, heart pounding. His throat was dry. His first instinct was to call the number back, but it had already disappeared from his call log. He blinked. Brooks Bistro. That place was on the rich end of town, where law students only went to deliver Uber Eats. By 6:45, the rain had grown heavier, soaking through the thin fabric of his worn coat. He stood outside the glowing windows of the bistro, watching well-dressed people sip wine and laugh inside. He felt like a ghost watching the living. At exactly 7 o'clock, he stepped inside, the warmth hitting him like a wall. Polished wood floors, soft piano music, flickering candles. He stood dripping near the entrance, drawing looks from polished patrons. A hostess approached, but before she could speak, a voice called from the corner. "Mark." She sat at a corner table, back straight, silver hair styled into a perfect twist, a string of pearls around her neck, and a black tailored suit that probably cost more than his year's tuition. Her skin was smooth, her eyes sharp. "Please," she gestured. "Sit." He obeyed, still unsure if this was real. "Mrs. Brooks," he said slowly. "Why am I here?" She sipped her tea, then set the cup down with a faint clink. "I'm going to be direct with you. I want to offer you a solution to your financial problems." He blinked. "What?" "Marry me." The words hit like a slap. He stared. "I'm sorry, what?" "This isn't about romance. I need a companion, not a lover. In return, I'll clear your debts, pay your mother's bills, your sister's tuition. You'll never worry about money again. Think of it as a contract, a transaction." He leaned back, stunned. "You don't even know me. I know enough. You're young, unmarried, desperate. That's all I need." He stood, breath shaky. "This is crazy. I need time to think." "Of course. But don't take too long. The offer won't wait." Forever, that night, at the kitchen table, he sat across from his mother. Her face was thin, tired, her hair brittle from chemo. She looked smaller every week. "She said she'd pay for everything," Mark whispered. "All of it. If I marry her." His mother's eyes filled with tears. "Sometimes the hardest path is the one that saves the most people. I'm not asking you to give up your life, Mark. I'm asking you to save ours." Mark didn't sleep that night. The rain tapped at the window like a ticking clock, counting down the seconds to a decision he never thought he'd face. The sky was still gray the next morning, but it wasn't the rain that pressed on Mark's chest. It was the weight of the choice he'd made. By noon, he was standing outside Brooks Bistro again, dressed in the only suit he owned, the cuffs slightly frayed, the fabric still smelling faintly of mothballs. His hands were in his pockets, fists clenched. He wasn't sure what scared him more, the idea of marrying a stranger, or what would happen if he didn't. Inside, Eleanor Brooks sat at her usual table, serene and unreadable. This time, she didn't offer a greeting, only lifted her chin slightly as he approached. Mark sat down, unsure if she'd already read his answer in his eyes. "I'll do it," he said quietly. She smiled, not warmly, but with a certain satisfaction. Like a deal had just been closed. Good. I've already contacted my lawyer. The papers will be drawn up. You'll be moved into the estate tomorrow. That fast? No questions about a wedding. No engagement. No ceremony planning. Just a signature. Just a signature, and your life isn't yours anymore. The courthouse was nearly empty the day they wed. A notary, a lawyer in a charcoal suit, Eleanor's assistant, and Mark. The vows were read like bullet points. Eleanor signed with a swift flick of the pen. When Mark took the pen in his own hand, he felt it trembling. But he signed, "Congratulations." The clerk said with forced cheer. Mark glanced at Eleanor, who extended her hand. He took it. It was cool. Her fingers lingered longer than expected. "Welcome to your new life, Mr. Davis." The ride to the estate was silent. Eleanor sat on one side of the black town car, eyes hidden behind tinted sunglasses. Mark stared out the window, watching as the city gave way to hills. The neighborhoods more expensive the farther they went. Then he saw it. The Brooks estate sat on a hill, gated, surrounded by iron fences and shadowy oak trees that curled like skeletal fingers. The mansion beyond the gate looked like something carved out of stone centuries ago, beautiful, but heavy, cold. The cab passed through the wrought iron gates that groaned like old bones as they opened. When the car stopped, Eleanor stepped out without a word. A line of staff waited on the marble steps. No one smiled. "This is home now," she said without turning. "Come." Mark followed her through a grand wooden door into the vast foyer. His sneakers squeaked on the polished floors. Portraits lined the hall, paintings of somber men and stiff-jawed women with names etched in gold beneath their faces. He was shown to his room by a silent housekeeper. The space was enormous, king-sized bed, velvet curtains, antique furnishings, but it felt like a showroom, not a home. The room looked as if no one had touched it in decades. That night, he sat at the long dining table, Eleanor at the far end. The meal was exquisite filet mignon, garlic risotto, wine in crystal glasses, but it felt like eating at a funeral. No music, no conversation, just the clinking of silverware. "You're adjusting well," she said at last. He blinked. "It's a lot." Her eyes flicked toward him. "You didn't ask me why I chose you. I figured I'd eventually hear it." "You will, in time." Later that evening, Mark wandered the halls. The house had a heartbeat of its own, faint, ticking from old clocks, muffled whispers through vents, creaking from floorboards that hadn't been walked on in years. He paused at one door. Unlike the others, this one had a dark handle, almost black, and no keyhole. Something about it felt different. He reached for it, but it was locked. Behind him, a voice startled him. "Some doors stay closed for a reason, Mr. Davis." He turned. Mr. Harris, the estate's butler, stood a few feet away, impeccably dressed, gray at the temples, posture straight as a blade. Mark cleared his throat. Didn't mean to pry. Mr. Harris nodded, though his eyes lingered on the door for a beat too long. The next morning, a housekeeper brought breakfast to his room. She didn't speak, didn't meet his gaze. Mark noticed a small envelope tucked between the plates. Inside was a card. One sentence, typed in neat black ink. "Ask her about Harold." No name, no explanation. He looked out the window at the still garden below. Somewhere, among the roses and the silence, lay a story he hadn't been told, and he was beginning to wonder if it would destroy him or set him free. The rain didn't fall that morning, but the sky still hung heavy, thick with gray clouds that seemed to sit like stone above the estate. Mark hadn't slept. The card still rested on his nightstand, untouched since he first read the sentence. "Ask her about Harold." Harold, the name didn't just whisper, it echoed. He'd gone over the guests at the wedding. Just the lawyer, a notary, Eleanor, and him. No friends, no family, no photos on the mantel, no warmth in her voice when she welcomed him into her home, no mention of a past. But someone had wanted him to know something, someone inside this house. He tucked the card into his jacket pocket and stepped into the hallway. The silence of the estate stretched like old wallpaper, familiar, lifeless, hiding cracks. A cleaning maid passed him in the corridor but didn't look up. When Mark said good morning, she flinched, then nodded quickly and disappeared around the corner. At breakfast, Eleanor sat alone at the dining table, spooning honey into her tea. She wore a navy blue silk blouse, and her pearls again, always those pearls, clinging to her neck like memory. Mark sat opposite her. "May I ask you something?" Her spoon paused midair. "You may." He cleared his throat. "Who's Harold?" Her hand resumed stirring slowly, gracefully, as if she'd been expecting the question all along. "My late husband," she said. "Harold Brooks." And she set the spoon down with surgical precision. "And nothing. He died a long time ago. His name should not concern you." "I think it does," Mark said quietly. "Especially if it's still haunting this house." She turned to him, eyes sharp. "Be careful, Mark. Curiosity is a luxury in this house, one you may not afford." Before he could reply, she stood. "I have business in town. You'll have the day to yourself. Do stay out of the East Wing." Then she was gone, leaving only the faint scent of her perfume behind. But Mark didn't go back to his room. He went to the East Wing. The hallway there was colder, dustier. The paintings changed, no longer oil portraits of stoic ancestors, but black and white. Photographs, a younger Eleanor. A man in a tuxedo beside her, smiling tightly. Harold. The man who had stood beside her decades ago in a wedding much grander than Mark's had ever been. He came to another locked door. The handle was bronze, tarnished. Then he saw another envelope, this one wedged beneath a vase, his name written on the front in delicate cursive. Inside, a single key. No note, no message, just the key. He held it, its weight sinking into his palm like truth. His fingers trembled slightly as he turned the handle. The key fit. The door opened with a slow creak, revealing a room untouched by time. Harold's study. The walls were lined with books, dark wood, and old leather. Papers sat on the desk, photographs behind glass, a clock that had stopped ticking long ago. And in the center, a small wooden box. Mark approached slowly, lifted the lid. Inside, a faded letter, folded neatly, addressed to David Davis, his father. He unfolded it. The handwriting was frantic, slanted, broken in places. "David, you lied to me. You ruined me. You took everything, my land, my investments, and my trust. Eleanor doesn't know yet, but she will. I hope she doesn't become what I fear she will. But if she does, God help whoever wears your name next." Harold. Mark's breath caught in his throat. It wasn't just business. It was personal. His father, the man who had died for years ago, had been part of whatever destroyed Harold Brooks, and now Eleanor had married his son. But why? For revenge? Or something worse? As he folded the letter and turned to leave, the door creaked behind him. Mr. Harris stood in the doorway. "You've seen it." Then the old butler said, voice low. Mark's heart pounded. "Why didn't you tell me?" Mr. Harris looked past him into the room. "Because telling you would have changed nothing. But discovering it, that was yours to bear." "I need to know," Mark said. "What happened to Harold? What happened between him and my father?" Mr. Harris's eyes darkened. "Harold Brooks died of a heart attack 3 months after losing everything in a deal your father orchestrated. A deal that destroyed this estate and Eleanor's trust in the world." Mark stepped back. "And me?" "You." Mr. Harris paused. "You're the son of the man who killed her past, and the pawn she believes will save her future." Mark couldn't breathe. The estate, the marriage, the money. It wasn't kindness. It wasn't companionship. It was a script, a long game written in grief and bitterness, and he was playing the lead role. That night, Eleanor returned home and found Mark waiting for her in the library. He didn't speak. He simply held out the letter. She looked at it. Then at him. Her voice was quiet, controlled. "So now, you know." Mark's fists were clenched at his sides. "You married me to get back at my father." Eleanor's smile was slow and strange. "No," she whispered. "I married you to finish what he started." Then she turned and left the room. And for the first time, Mark realized he wasn't a guest here. He was the final chapter. The storm rolled in just after midnight. Thunder groaned low across the hills, the kind that didn't crack, but rumbled like a warning. Lightning danced across the glass windows of the estate, pale streaks flashing through the velvet curtains of Mark's room. But it wasn't the storm that kept him awake. It was the look in Eleanor's eyes, that calm, cruel whisper, "I married you to finish what he started." Those words lived in his chest now. They moved with his breath, burned behind his eyes, and worse than that, he didn't know what they meant. Mark paced his room, his bare feet silent on the cold floorboards. The air in the estate had changed. The silence no longer felt indifferent, it felt watchful. Like the walls were listening. Like every step he took was being noted, that he had to get out. He had to know what he'd been pulled into. Just after 3 in the morning, he crept down the hallway and into the west wing, away from the eyes of the house staff. He wasn't even sure what he was looking for. More letters, documents, a confession. He opened one door, just a linen closet, another empty. Then he reached the door with the dark wood and brass edge, the one Mr. Harris had warned him about. It was unlocked now. The handle turned smoothly. The room smelled faintly of sandalwood and thyme. Inside, he found filing cabinets, dozens, labeled in neat black marker. Brooks Corp. 2005, Estate Holdings 1990 to 2001, donations, political, and Davis. He froze. The cabinet was near the back, as if tucked away on purpose. His hands were shaking as he pulled the drawer open. Inside were records, copies of signed contracts, bank withdrawals, letters, his father's signature on each page, documents outlining property transfers, false valuations, inflated prices, fraud, layered, concealed, orchestrated, and legal, just barely, and tucked beneath them all, a photo, Mark's father, standing beside Harold Brooks. Smiling. In the background of the photo, blurred but unmistakable, Eleanor. She hadn't been a bystander in all this. She had seen the betrayal happen. She had watched it unfold. Mark sat back on the dusty desk chair, heart pounding. The pieces were starting to fit. Eleanor's wealth wasn't inherited, it was rebuilt, reconstructed brick by brick from ashes his father had helped scatter. But why marry him? Why not go after the people in the contracts, the lawyers, the bankers? Because they were all gone, and he was what was left. He heard a sound behind him, soft, like silk over hardwood. He turned. Harris stood in the doorway again, silent. Mark didn't speak this time. He simply looked up at him. You knew, Mark said. Harris nodded once. I did. So why the hell didn't you stop her? The old man stepped inside, shutting the door behind him with a quiet click. Because I loved her husband, he said softly, and I failed him. That silenced Mark. Harris moved slowly to the edge of the desk, placing a trembling hand on the photograph Mark had just uncovered. Harold was good, the butler said. Too good. Trusted too easily. When the deal collapsed and your father walked away with everything, Harold didn't want revenge. He wanted to move on. But Eleanor buried herself in the rubble. She spent decades building the pieces of his legacy again, not to honor him, but to prove something, that she could outlast the men who broke her. And when she saw your name in a scholarship file at the law school, he trailed off. She saw her final move. Mark swallowed. I'm a trophy, a punishment. She doesn't want a husband, she wants a witness. She wants a legacy, Mr. Harris said. And if she can't carry Harold's name into the future, she'll chain it to yours. Mark stood suddenly, slamming the drawer shut. I won't let her. Then be careful, Mr. Harris warned. Because Eleanor is not just dangerous when she's angry. She's dangerous when she's grieving, and I don't think she knows the difference anymore. That night, Mark didn't return to his room. He went to the library. In there, buried in the bottom drawer of Eleanor's personal desk, he found something even more terrifying than the contracts, the letters, or the locked doors. He found a recent document, filed 2 weeks before the wedding, a change of beneficiary, all estate assets, liquid and fixed, to transfer to Mark Davis. No conditions, no restrictions. Eleanor had given him everything. But why? Was it an act of final revenge, a cruel joke, or something else? The house was quiet as he walked back to his room, the paper folded in his jacket pocket like a secret waiting to explode. When he opened his bedroom door, he stopped cold. Eleanor was sitting in the chair near his window, one leg crossed over, the other, a glass of red wine in her hand. She didn't look surprised, only amused. You've been busy, she said. Mark didn't answer. She took a slow sip from her glass, then set it on the table beside her. I knew you'd find it eventually. He stepped into the room. "You changed your will. You're giving me everything." "Yes," she said calmly, "because when I'm gone, you'll be the one holding the weight of two families." Mark's voice cracked. "You planned this from the start." Eleanor rose to her feet and walked toward him. Her eyes ice blue and bottomless stared into his. "I planned everything, Mark, but I didn't plan what I'd feel when you looked at me with Harold's eyes." She brushed past him and whispered over her shoulder, "Be careful with what you inherit. Some things, once passed on, never stop haunting." And just like that, she was gone, leaving Mark standing in the doorway of his own life, not sure if he had just inherited a fortune or a curse. The morning after Eleanor's chilling visit, the sun broke through the clouds for the first time in days, but the warmth never reached inside the Brooks estate. Mark stood in the grand hall, staring up at the towering portrait of Harold Brooks above the fireplace. The painting showed a confident, composed man in a charcoal suit, eyes calm, jaw sharp. But the longer Mark looked at it, the more he felt those eyes weren't just watching him. They were warning him. Every part of the estate, the polished floors, the oil paintings, the heavy velvet curtains, felt like it had been built to bury something. And Mark was beginning to wonder if Eleanor had ever planned to leave this place at all, or if she'd intended to trap someone else in it. And now it was him. He tried calling Peter. No answer. He texted. No reply. The silence outside the estate stretched like a wall. When he stepped out to check the front gate, he found it locked, not just with the usual keypad, but with new chains bolted through the wrought iron. Panic clawed at him. He called out to a groundskeeper tending to the rose garden. The man looked at him once, then turned and walked away without a word. Mark returned inside, heart pounding. Later, at dinner, Eleanor didn't bring up the locked gate. She didn't mention the revised will or her midnight visit to his room. She sat at the end of the table, sipping her wine, speaking only of shallow things: stocks, a museum opening, and old friends passing. She was calm, polished. Unforgettable. Double quotes. "Is something wrong?" she asked smoothly, her fork hovering over a slice of seared duck. Mark stared at her, trying to decide if she was mocking him. "The gate's locked. I can't leave." She smiled. "It's for your protection." "From what?" "From the world," she said, taking a delicate bite. "Out there, you're drowning in debt, buried in your father's sins. In here, you're safe, taken care of, important." Mark leaned forward. "This isn't care, it's a cage." Eleanor set her utensils down and wiped her mouth gently with her napkin. "You're young, Mark. You think freedom is about escape, but some prisons look like choices." She rose, leaving her wine half finished. "I've made you heir to everything. That's more freedom than most men your age will ever taste." That night, he waited until the house was quiet. Then he returned to Eleanor's study. He had to know what came next. He had to know if she intended to trap him forever or worse. He searched the cabinets again, rifling through folders, drawers, compartments until he found something buried behind a false panel in the lower drawer. A video tape. Old, labeled in faded ink, Harold -1999. Private. His hands trembled as he slid the tape into the old player still wired into Eleanor's bookshelf. Television. The screen crackled, lines streaking across the blackness. Then the image came into focus. Harold Brooks. He sat at the same desk Mark was sitting at now, older than in the painting. His shoulders heavier, his eyes less certain. He looked directly into the camera. "If you're watching this," Harold began, "then either I'm dead or someone finally had the sense to ask the right questions." Mark leaned in, his pulse rising. "I was deceived," Harold said, "by David Davis. I thought he was my partner, my friend. Instead, he took every piece of the Brooks legacy and gambled it into dust. My wife, or she won't forgive. She never could, and I fear what that bitterness will grow into if she tries to make him pay. Don't let her." The tape cut to static. Mark sat frozen. Harold had left a warning, not just about David but about Eleanor. She had ignored it. She had married him anyway, not just to punish David, but because she'd needed to reframe the past, to control the narrative, to remake Harold's story with herself as both victim and victor. As he reached to eject the tape, he heard a sound, a faint whimper. coming from inside the wall. Mark froze. Then it came again. A cry, soft, high-pitched, trembling like someone crying behind the plaster. He rose slowly and pressed his ear to the paneling near the fireplace. Another faint sound. Scratching. He turned and followed the noise across the study to a bookshelf. He pulled at books, pressed along the edges until one panel shifted, and behind it, a narrow staircase leading downward. Not part of any blueprint. Mark grabbed a flashlight. The air turned cold as he descended. Dust swirled. The wooden steps creaked. The passage twisted and dropped into blackness. At the bottom, a heavy metal door. Another cry. Closer now. Mark reached for the handle and someone touched his shoulder. He spun around. It was Mr. Harris. Pale. Shaking. You need to stop, the old butler whispered. Mark held up the flashlight. There's someone down there. No, Harris said. There was, years ago, but not anymore. What are you talking about? Mr. Harris's voice cracked. Eleanor kept someone locked in that basement after Harold died. A man who tried to expose your father. She said he was dangerous, a liar. She convinced everyone, even me. But then he disappeared. And the door was sealed. No one has gone in since. Mark's voice was hoarse. Why didn't you tell me? I was afraid, the butler said, and I still am. But you're here now. Mr. Harris looked at him. Because I've seen what happens when you let grief rot inside someone. Mark turned back to the door. The handle was cold. He twisted it. It opened with a groan. The flashlight beam cut through the darkness, revealing a cell, metal bars, old chains, mold-stained walls, dust everywhere, no sign of life. But on the far wall, writing, scrawled in deep red, dried and cracked, "She won't let you leave. She never did." And beneath it, in smaller letters, "Run." Mark stared at it for a long time, the breath locked in his chest. When he finally turned to look at Mr. Harris, the old man had tears in his eyes. "I'm sorry," he whispered. Mark stepped back out of the cell. He didn't feel like an heir anymore. He felt like the next chapter in a horror Eleanor had been writing for decades. And the ink wasn't dry yet. The next morning, the estate was wrapped in silence, thicker than fog. Not the usual kind, the dignified hush of wealth and order, but a dead silence, like something had stopped breathing. Mark stood at the tall windows of his room, watching the sunlight struggle through the overgrown branches outside. There was no wind, no birdsong, not even the sound of the house staff moving around. It was as if the estate itself had paused, waiting for something or someone. The writing on the wall from the basement still burned in Mark's memory. "She won't let you leave. She never did. Run." He could still hear the creaking of that metal door, still feel the chill that wrapped around him as he'd stood in that cell. The cold breath of unfinished stories lingering in the air. The air in his room felt tighter now. He'd tried again to reach Peter, this time from the library's landline. Static, then nothing. When he tried the estate Wi-Fi, it was offline, his phone dead. Though he'd charged it overnight, no signal, no service, no help. Eleanor had cut him off completely. He was inside a cage with antique walls, hand-painted ceilings, and no keys. That afternoon, Mark went searching, not for clues this time, for escape routes. He wandered the estate grounds alone. The east corridor had a fire door sealed from the outside. The cellar exit was bricked over. The garden gate was wired to a silent alarm. Everywhere he turned, he found Eleanor's precision, her forethought. She'd anticipated his every move, except maybe one. Mark returned to the butler's quarters. Mr. Harris opened the door, his eyes already red. "I know," he whispered before Mark could speak. "Then help me." The old man hesitated, his hands still on the knob. "If I help you," he said, "there's no going back. She'll know. She always knows." "I don't care," Mark said. "I'm not staying here and becoming whatever she thinks I'm supposed to be." Mr. Harris's face twisted in grief. "She'll destroy you before she lets you go." Mark nodded. "Then let her try." Mr. Harris stepped aside. Inside his private quarters, he pulled up a loose floorboard and revealed a rusted tin box. Inside keys, papers, maps of the estate from before the renovations. And a journal. A black leather-bound book. Harris held it out to Mark. "This was Harold's," he said. "She doesn't know I kept it." Mark opened the journal carefully. page after page of entries, each written in a confident but increasingly disturbed hand. Day 17. David Davis is not returning my calls. Eleanor says to be patient, but I can see it in her eyes. Something's changing in her. Day 35. Eleanor has taken over the finances. She's sharper than I thought, smarter. I thought I'd be leading this family into the future, but she's already outpacing me. Day 61. I'm starting to wonder if she needs me at all. Then one entry stopped Mark cold. Day 94. There's no business partner. There's no recovery. Eleanor is rebuilding something else. I think she wants the legacy, but not with me. The last page was blank. Mark closed the journal. She didn't just want to punish my father, he whispered. She wanted to replace Harold. Mr. Harris nodded slowly. And now you're the replacement. That night, Mark didn't sleep. He waited for Eleanor to come, and she did. Just after midnight, the door to his room opened quietly. No knock, no announcement, just the soft sweep of her presence, dressed in a black silk robe, pearls still at her throat, hair neatly twisted, not a strand out of place. She walked to the window and stood there, looking out into the dark. You've found the basement, she said softly. Mark didn't answer. You've spoken to Harris. Still silence. She turned then, her eyes calm but alive with a flicker of something deeper, something between madness and pain. I know what you're thinking, she said, that I'm cruel, twisted, broken. Mark sat on the edge of the bed, jaw clenched. I think you've turned your grief into a prison and invited me to rot in it. Eleanor tilted her head. No, I turned my grief into order. You have no idea what it's like to watch everything fall apart and no one pay for it. I rebuilt from ash. Mark, I gave you a place in that empire. You should be grateful. He stood slowly. I didn't ask for it. No, she said, but you owe it. For what your father did. For what Harold lost. I'm not my father. Eleanor smiled bitterly. And I'm not the girl he married. We're both shadows now, Mark. That's what legacy does to people. Then her voice lowered. But you still have a choice. Mark stared. What choice? She stepped closer, almost too close. Her perfume was soft, elegant, suffocating. Stay, finish the name. Be the face of the estate. Take what I built and carry it forward. Or what? She whispered now, her voice barely audible. Try to run and find out what really happened to the last man who said no. Mark didn't blink. He didn't move. She smiled and stepped back. I'll let you sleep on it. Then she turned and walked out, her bare feet silent on the carpet. The door closed with a soft click. And this time, it locked from the outside. Mark stood there, heart racing, every hair on his arms raised. He realized then he was no longer a guest. He was the next ghost. And Eleanor Brooks didn't build a mansion. She built a mausoleum. With a pulse, the next morning came late. Mark didn't wake to sunlight or birdsong. There were none. Only the low groan of old pipes above him and the mechanical hum of silence. That had become a second skin in the Brooks estate. The room was darker than usual. The curtains hadn't been drawn, and the door was still locked from the outside. He stared at the ceiling for what felt like hours, his breath shallow. Every word Eleanor had whispered the night before was stitched into his. Thoughts like thorns, stay, or find out what happened to the last man who said no. He sat up and scanned the room. No phone, no key, no escape. But he still had one thing, the black journal. Harold Brooks' voice lived in those pages. If Eleanor had built her empire out of vengeance, Harold had poured his last truth into that book. And somewhere inside it was the answer. Mark flipped to the middle and reread the section about the man Eleanor had once locked in the basement. The entries got stranger, fractured thoughts, scribbled maps, names, initials. Then one line jolted him. The East Wing fireplace has a false bottom. They never sealed it after the renovation. If anything happens to me, that's where I'll hide the proof. Proof. His heart started pounding. He waited until noon. When the maid came to bring food, he feigned sleep. When the door creaked open, he struck quiet and fast, slipping out, slamming the door shut and locking her inside. He ran down the corridor, past the paintings, past the whispering walls and the watching portraits. To the East Wing. The fireplace was grand, carved from white marble, Flanked by bronze lions, Mark dropped to his knees and began feeling along the edge of the stone. Nothing. Then he reached up inside the mouth of the fireplace and felt a faint click. The hearth shifted. A narrow stone compartment slid forward, revealing a sealed metal box. He yanked it out and pried it open. Inside, documents, photographs, CASSETTE tapes, and one folder labeled Davis Final, his father's name, and Harold's final plan. Mark flipped it open and nearly dropped it. It was a confession, written by Harold himself. It outlined the entire deal with David Davis, how Harold had discovered the fraud too late, how Eleanor had begged him to stay silent to protect their name, how she had turned on him when he threatened to go public, and how he feared she would silence him permanently. If you're reading this, I may already be gone. I don't believe Eleanor will kill me, but I do believe she'll bury the truth with me. Whoever finds this, protect yourself. She knows how to hide crimes in plain sight. Mark stood up, chest heaving. That was it. This was what could destroy her. He grabbed the box, shoved it into a satchel from the coat closet, and made for the back entrance. But the moment he stepped into the hallway, two estate guards were waiting. Not staff, not gardeners. Security. Private, silent men in black suits. They didn't speak. One stepped forward. Mark turned and ran down the service stairs, through the wine cellar, into the garden atrium. He didn't stop. The box slammed against his ribs as he darted around corners, shoved through hedges, vaulted over the low garden wall. He made it to the old servant's path hidden beneath shrubs and crawled until his knees bled. The path led to a forgotten gate, one he'd seen on the old map Mr. Harris had given him. The lock was rusted, but he kicked it open. And just like that, he was out. He ran for nearly a mile, through thick brush and forest, and silence, until the estate was far behind him. The sound of his heartbeat was louder than his footsteps. Finally, out of breath, he collapsed at the edge of a roadside. A car slowed. A man rolled down the window. "You all right?" Mark nodded, barely able to speak. "Please, I need to make a call." Hours later, Mark sat across from Peter Lynn at a small diner, the box open between them. Peter's eyes widened as he flipped through the papers. "This is enough to destroy her," Peter whispered. "You're lucky she didn't have you killed." "She doesn't want me dead," Mark muttered. "She wants me to inherit her empire, to carry her name, to live in that house as some twisted tribute to Harold and her pain." Peter looked at him. "You're going to the police, right?" Mark nodded. But part of him hesitated. Why had Eleanor given him everything? Why marry him at all, if she knew what this box could do? And then it hit him. Because she wanted it to be him, she wanted him to find it, to choose, either bury the truth and become her successor, or destroy her and become her enemy, the final test of loyalty. He stared down at the folder again. The weight of legacy, choice, vengeance, love, all of it pressed on his chest like stone. And somewhere, back in the dark corridors of the Brooks estate, Eleanor Brooks was waiting to see which version of her husband's legacy would walk through that door again. Mark swallowed hard. He looked up at Peter and whispered, "I have to go back." The wind howled as Mark stepped out of Peter's car at the edge of the Brooks estate. The gates were still chained, but this time, he wasn't trying to escape. He was returning, not as a prisoner, but as a storm. The weight of Harold's confession burned in his satchel, his father's sins, Eleanor's silence, the betrayal that had destroyed one life and twisted another. The entire legacy now balanced on the edge of what he would do next. Mark had made his choice. The walk up the long driveway was different this time. The trees, once looming and cruel, seemed to bow. The mansion, that cold colossus of secrets, stood still, expectant, and when the doors opened, Eleanor was waiting. She stood at the base of the staircase, dressed in black, as if for a funeral. Not his, not Harold's, her own. "You came back," she said softly. Mark's heart pounded. "I had to." She studied him. "Do you have it?" He reached into his coat and pulled out the leather satchel. Eleanor didn't flinch. "I knew Harold kept something. I never found it." "You didn't want to find it," Mark said. Her eyes glinted. "Perhaps." A long silence followed. Mark stepped forward. "Why me, Eleanor? Why really? Her voice didn't waver. Because you're the only man I've ever met who would both hate me and still understand me. Mark stared. You could have chosen anyone, he said, anyone young and desperate. But you picked me because of my name. I picked you, she whispered, because I wanted someone to carry the weight, someone who would feel the burden of both legacies. Harold's heart, your father's shadow. You were born with the guilt of one man and the potential of the other. I wanted to see which side would win. You married me to see if I'd become your redemption, he said, voice sharp. No, she said. I married you to see if I'd deserve it. She stepped aside and gestured toward the library. Come. They walked in silence. The staff didn't move. The chandeliers didn't flicker. The house had become a tomb again. A mausoleum filled with ghosts. Mark placed the satchel on the long oak desk and opened it. He pulled out the confession, the photos, the tapes. He laid it all before her. Eleanor looked at each item as if seeing pieces of her own corpse laid out for burial. I read it all, he said. Harold was ready to forgive. You weren't. I couldn't, she whispered. You locked a man in the basement. You cut me off from the outside. You married me for revenge. I married you, Eleanor said, voice trembling now, because I wanted to destroy your name. And then I wanted to save it. Mark stared at her and saw at the flicker in her eyes. Not coldness, not cruelty, regret. I thought revenge would free me, she whispered. But it just built another prison. One I decorated with oil paintings and chandeliers. Mark's voice was low. So now what? Eleanor took a long breath and stepped behind the desk. She opened a drawer and pulled out a document. I drafted this before the wedding, she said, in case I ever lost control of the story. Mark looked down. Declaration of full confession and legal surrender signed, notarized, dated 3 days before their wedding. You planned your own downfall? He asked, stunned. I planned for the day I'd meet someone strong enough to take me down and still walk away whole. And you think that's me? I hoped it was. Mark's hands were shaking as he took the document. You'll go to prison. Yes, you'll lose everything. I already did. She turned toward the window. Harold is gone. Your father is gone. All that's left is you, in a house built on blood and silence. Mark stared at her. You want me to burn it down. I want you to free it. That night, Mark stood in the grand sitting room, holding the confession, the satchel, the tapes. He made the call, not to the police yet, but to Peter, to coordinate the surrender. The estate would be seized. The documents would go public. The Brooks name would fall, but so would the Davis name. And Mark was ready. At a.m. Eleanor entered the room one last time. She wore no pearls, no makeup, just a simple gray sweater. Her age showed through for the first time. I was always so afraid, she said quietly, afraid that if I stopped controlling everything, the pain would come back. I didn't realize it never left. It only learned how to wear heels. Mark didn't speak. He just nodded once. As if to say, I know. Eleanor crossed the room slowly, stopped beside him, and placed something into his hand. A small locket. Inside, to photos Harold and a young Eleanor. I loved him, she whispered. I just forgot how. Tears filled her eyes but didn't fall. She stepped back. When they come tomorrow, I'll be here. She left him alone in the sitting room, but not the way she used to. Not as prey, but as witness, and maybe, just maybe, as something more. The morning of the reckoning arrived beneath a bruised sky, thick with clouds that hung low over the estate like silent jurors awaiting a verdict. Mark stood at the top of the grand staircase, staring down at the once imposing halls of the Brooks mansion. It no longer felt like a palace of power. It felt like a monument to pain. Every painting on the walls, every chandelier above, every quiet portrait and sealed door whispered the same truth. Something here has finally ended. But not quietly. In the distance, the sound of engines rumbled through the gravel drive. Black vehicles, government issue, a county prosecutor's car, to marked police cruisers, one unmarked van. The air felt electric. Mark descended the staircase slowly. Eleanor waited at the bottom, wearing the same gray sweater from the night before. Her hands were folded in front of her, calm as a stone. Her hair pulled back into a low twist that revealed the deep lines time and grief had carved into her face. She looked less like the woman who had manipulated him into a marriage, and more like a widow standing at the gates of her own past, ready to be judged. They're early, she murmured, eyes flicking to the windows. You were expecting them? Mark asked, voice low. I asked them to come at noon, she said. But fate rarely respects appointments. The doors opened without a knock. 2 officers entered first, followed by a woman in a sharp navy blazer, Prosecutor Lydia Kent. She was efficient, no nonsense, and carried herself like a woman who'd dismantled legacies before. Eleanor Brooks, Kent called out, stepping forward. You are under investigation for charges related to financial fraud, coercion, and obstruction of justice. You've been notified through your legal counsel. I've prepared a full confession. Eleanor interrupted, stepping forward and handing over the sealed document. All records are in my study, including tapes and ledgers my late husband compiled. I am willing to cooperate fully. Kent blinked, caught off guard. You're surrendering? Eleanor gave a slow nod. Completely. Kent glanced at Mark, as if unsure whether this was part of some elaborate charade. Mark stepped forward. I'll be providing corroborating testimony and copies of everything she's about to give you. For a moment, no one moved. The only sound was the ticking of the antique clock on the far wall. Then the officers moved, quiet, efficient. They took the documents, searched the study, boxed the tapes, cataloged the photos. Within an hour, the house no longer belonged to the Brooks. Name it belonged to evidence. As they prepared to escort Eleanor out, Kent looked at Mark again. You're listed as her legal husband, she said. You'll be asked to testify. Mark nodded. I'm ready. Kent gave a short nod and turned. Eleanor approached him then. There were no guards pulling her away. No shackles yet on her wrists. Just her, and the man she had married for all the wrong reasons. I don't regret choosing you, she said softly. Mark's throat tightened. Even after everything, especially after everything, she whispered. Because you were the only one in this house who didn't disappear. She reached up and touched the side of his face gently, then turned, placed her hands behind her back, and nodded to the officers. They walked her through the front doors of the estate. She never looked back. Mark stood alone in the silence, and then, slowly, he began to hear the house breathe again. Not the ghosts, not the grief, but space. Space where something new could grow. The following weeks were a whirlwind of legal proceedings. Mark sat in courtrooms, gave testimony, provided records. The media storm hit hard. Millionaire widow behind bars secret. Marriage and hidden empire exposed. But Mark didn't hide. He walked straight through it. He told the truth about his father, about Eleanor, about Harold, and about himself. But the most haunting moment came weeks later. After the sentencing, Eleanor had received 10 years, reduced for full cooperation. On the morning of her departure to the women's federal facility, a final letter arrived. It was addressed in Eleanor's elegant, slanted hand. Mark opened it on the front steps of the now abandoned estate. Inside was a single page. Mark, prison may finally give me the silence I once feared. Maybe I'll meet my ghosts there and learn how to grieve the right way. But this house, this name, I give it to you not as a gift, but as a choice. Destroy it, if you must, or turn it into something worthy of Harold's memory, something that never hides the truth again. You were never my pawn. You were my mirror. Thank you for showing me who I truly became. Eleanor, tears filled Mark's eyes. Not for her crimes, not for her sentence, but for the rare kind of truth that comes too late, yet still matters. That same week, he sold the estate. He donated part of the funds to families defrauded by Eleanor's old companies. The rest he used to build something Harold would have approved of, a public legal aid center. In the heart of Texas, a place where the silenced could speak. And the buried truths could rise. He called it the Harold Brooks Foundation for Justice. It wasn't a tribute to her legacy, that it was a rescue mission for his own. And as the doors of the new center opened on a clear spring day, Mark stood beside the plaque at the entrance, breathing the fresh air like it was the first time he'd ever tasted freedom. Because for once, the story he was living didn't begin with someone else's name, it began with his. The ribbon cut clean. Cheers rose from the small crowd gathered outside the new brick building on the corner of Marlowe, and 8th, the site of what was once a long-forgotten community center. now reborn into something far greater. Its sign gleamed. In the midday sun, the Harold Brooks Foundation for Justice built on truth, made for the unheard. Mark Davis stood in front of it, the scissors still in his hand, a soft wind pulling at the edge of his jacket. His heart beat with quiet thunder, not from pride, not even relief, but from something closer to resolve. Behind him stood the people who now filled his days: law students, pro bono lawyers, community leaders, volunteers, real people, honest lives, survivors of silence. He'd made a decision when Eleanor went to prison. He wouldn't be the end of a bitter story. He'd be the beginning of a new one. But the past hadn't released him yet. That night, long after the guests had left and the building had emptied, Mark walked the freshly painted halls alone. The foundation's walls still smelled of sawdust and varnish. The furniture was simple but strong. The main conference room held only one framed photo, a black and white image of Harold Brooks, smiling beside a younger Eleanor, one of the only pictures she hadn't burned. Mark had placed it there intentionally, because this wasn't about erasing the past. It was about confronting it with open eyes. He sat at the edge of the wide wooden table, rubbing his fingers across the envelope he'd been carrying all day, one delivered just that morning by a plain-dressed courier. No name on the return label. He knew the handwriting the moment he saw it. Eleanor Brooks, from prison. His hands trembled slightly as he opened it. Inside, a photograph. Old, faded. It showed Harold's study, the fireplace in the background, and a baby crib in the foreground. What? Mark flipped the photo over. Scrawled in Eleanor's hand were for chilling words. He wasn't my only. Mark's breath caught. His mind reeled. He scanned the room, as if the photo itself might burst into flame. He looked again at the picture, closer now. The date in the corner, 1983. Eleanor and Harold had no children. She'd said so herself. Had repeated it like a mantra. No family, no heirs. But this changed everything. He bolted up, heart racing. He needed answers again. He pulled his phone and called Peter. Peter, remember when we looked into the Brooks family records? You said no children ever registered. Yeah, Peter replied, groggy. I checked birth records, adoption filings, nothing came up. Check again, Mark said, already pulling his coat on. Not for Eleanor Brooks, for Harold. Wait, what? Just do it. Within an hour, Peter called back. His voice was low, careful. There's something weird. A sealed birth certificate filed under the name Samuel H. Whitman, born 1983. Father listed, Harold Brooks. Mother, classified. Mark felt the ground tilt beneath him. Where's he? Peter paused. That's the thing. There's a sealed juvenile record from 1999, foster care, behavioral corrections, institutional housing, but no death certificate. Mark's voice was a whisper. You're telling me Eleanor has a son? No. I'm telling you he might still be alive. Mark hung up and sank into his chair. All this time, Eleanor had focused on revenge, on legacy, on Mark. But what if he had never been the true heir? What if she was waiting for something else, someone else? The lights flickered once above him. Then again, a strange hum filled the air, low, electric, almost imperceptible. Then came a knock. At the back door. 3 sharp knocks. Mark's blood ran cold. No one used that entrance. He walked slowly through the darkened hallway toward the door. He reached for the knob. Paused. His heart beat so loud he thought the walls might hear. Then he opened it. A young man stood there, mid-30s, pale skin, unkempt black hair, hollow eyes. His clothes were worn, his hands scarred. A leather satchel hung from his shoulder. I think you know who I am, the man said softly. Mark's voice barely came out. Samuel. The man nodded. I got her. Let her, he said. She told me it was time to come home. Mark stared at him, at the tired, weathered version of a life once buried. What do you want? Mark asked. Samuel reached into his coat and pulled out a folded document. She left this for both of us, he said. Mark unfolded it. It was a revised will. Updated from prison. Half of everything, assets, residuals, rights, properties split between Mark Davis and Samuel H. Whitman, with one sentence handwritten beneath the signature, only one. Of you will know what to do with it. Mark looked up, breath shaking. Samuel's eyes narrowed. "So which one of us do you think she meant?" The wind outside howled louder than before. And just like that, the story wasn't over. It had just split into two.